Them both.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, sorry about the delay.
No worries.
You know what? Maybe you can make Matt co-host because now I can't.
Oh, yep.
Okay.
Did that work, Matt?
Yep, we're all good.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
Thank you.
Yep. Good luck, Kari.
Thank you. All right. Matt, do you want to say anything to begin, or do you want me to just get started?
Sure, I'll just say a couple of things. I just want to welcome everybody today to Kari Sherwood's Dissertation Defense. I have worked with Kari for the last 7 years, and this is probably the most the most excited I've ever been for dissertation defense. And so I am really excited to have Kari go for it. And I think we're in for a treat. So thanks everybody for joining us. And Kari, without further ado, tell us all about your dissertation.
Okay. All right. So first of all, I just want to thank everyone so much for being here today. If you are here, it is probably because you have been a big part of the reason why I am where I am right now, and why I've made it to this point. And so thank you for all of your support over the years, however many years I've known you. So the title of my dissertation is Microaggressions and Camouflaging, a mixed method study on the social maltreatment of autistic adults at work. And just a little note on some of the language I'm going to be using today. I use identity first language. So for example, autistic person rather than person first language. For example, person with autism. And this is in response to clear preferences that have been voiced by the autistic community. Many autistic individuals have expressed that autism is integral to their identity, not something separate from them. This is comparable to other identity-based language we commonly use. For example, we say Black person, not person with Blackness. And so also you'll hear me use the word allistic, which is the term used to refer to non-autistic people. So just a little introduction to autism. 1 in 36 children are diagnosed with autism in the United States currently. It is considered a neurodevelopmental disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is what doctors use to make their diagnoses. However, autism is claimed as both a diagnosable disability and a social identity. And disability intersects with other social identities such as race, gender, sexuality, etc. For example, we know there are disparities in diagnosis for people of color and those who identify as female, with people of color being less likely to receive a diagnosis or services than white people. And there are higher rates of depression among Black autistic individuals. We also know that autistic people are 4 times more likely to be bullied and 11 times more likely to experience mental health challenges. They are also 2 to 8 times more likely to die by suicide than allistic people, with higher rates for autistic females. And autistic people typically have a life expectancy around 16 to 30 years shorter than allistic individuals. Here are some statistics on autistic mental health. Autistic people are more likely to experience mental health problems, like I mentioned. As many as 79% of autistic individuals have at least one co-occurring psychiatric disorder during their lifetime, with about 54% having an anxiety disorder at some point in their lives, and about 57% having depression at some point in their lives. Autistic people experience significant amounts of stigma and discrimination, which presents challenges to their self-esteem and well-being, including feelings of social exclusion and loneliness. And exposure to stigma and discrimination can also result in internalized stigma, leading the victim to struggle with maintaining a positive perception of their own identity, which can then lead to mental health problems. One type of bullying that is common among autistic individuals in particular is social exclusion or rejection, which has been shown to reduce prosocial behavior, cause emotional distress, and reduce cognition and self-regulation. For example, only 7% of autistic people report feeling accepted by society. And then 1/2 to 2/3 of autistic people don't have any close friendships. And in one study, autistic people were 40 times more likely to experience unfair treatment compared to allistic or neurotypical individuals. When we talk about social maltreatment, there are a lot of different ways maltreatment can be measured. For this dissertation, I specifically defined 3 different types of social maltreatment. And those are microaggressions, everyday discrimination, and interpersonal conflict. Some examples of microaggressions include things like, I was excluded at work based on my autism. I was invited to a work event that was not accessible to me. Someone at work said they did not think of me as having autism. Some examples of discrimination include things like, I am treated with less respect than other people. People act as if they think I'm not smart, or I am threatened or harassed. And then some examples of interpersonal conflict include, I get into arguments with others at work, people yell at me at work, or people are rude to me at work. So as you can see, there's a lot of overlap between these different types of social maltreatment. And that's one of the issues in the scientific literature right now, is figuring out how to differentiate between these different types of social maltreatment. So I want to go a little bit further into microaggressions, as that's usually the one that people are not as familiar with. Microaggressions have been defined as brief everyday exchanges that send denigrating messages to certain individuals because of their group membership. Microaggressions can result in disparities in health, education, and employment, and autistic individuals with additional marginalized identities report experiencing microaggressions even more frequently. Camouflaging, or masking as it's commonly referred to, is a common response to autism-related stigma. And camouflaging is defined as specific behavioral and cognitive strategies by autistic people to adapt or cope with the predominantly non-autistic social world. And it's pretty well known that many autistic people camouflage or disguise behavior that might be viewed as socially unacceptable, or artificially perform social behavior that is deemed to be more socially acceptable. And autistic individuals report camouflaging to fit in or connect with others, to be treated as equal, and to obtain or maintain employment. Some camouflaging behaviors that have been reported include modeling allistic communication, avoiding discussion of oneself or one's special interests, reducing fidgeting or self-stimulatory behaviors like hand flapping, or avoiding disclosure of autism diagnosis. And masking and camouflaging have both been studied fairly extensively in the autism population, but not in the work setting, which is what this study is going to focus on. And we also know that camouflaging has a negative impact on mental and physical health. And these effects are, again, exacerbated for autistic individuals with other marginalized identities. For example, autistic people of color camouflage as a response to both ableism and racism. In the literature, camouflaging is broken down into 3 different constructs: compensation, masking, and assimilation. Although the autistic community typically just refers to this as this entire construct as masking, but in the literature, it's defined as camouflaging and then broken down into these 3 different constructs. And an example of compensation would be When I'm interacting with someone, I deliberately copy their body language or facial expressions. An example of masking would be, I feel the need to make eye contact with other people, even if I don't want to. And then an example of assimilation would be, in social situations, I feel like I'm performing rather than being myself. And prior research has shown that 75% of autistic individuals report camouflaging to appear less autistic. Although, and while it's sometimes effective in the short term, camouflaging is not a long-term solution, as it has been shown to have negative impacts on mental and physical health for autistic individuals. For example, autistic adults who engage in camouflaging have been shown to be more likely to experience depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation. Autism-related stigma can be found across all social environments, and that includes the workplace. Autistic adults are commonly unemployed or underemployed at higher rates than their disabled and non-disabled peers. Only 58% of autistic adults have ever had a paying job, and that's despite them reporting that they would like to work. And many of the jobs that they do have are often low paying or part-time. And research shows that social difficulties are one of the leading causes behind the high unemployment rate in the autistic community. And while there are some laws in place to protect disabled workers from discrimination and to make sure employers offer accommodations, many autistic adults still choose not to disclose their disability at work due to a fear of stigma or retaliation. And employment is important because it is a social determinant of health. It can offer psychological, social, and physical health benefits. It can affect our quality of life. It can reduce social isolation and add engagement and meaning to our lives, instill a sense of personal achievement, and give us financial independence. The theoretical frameworks I used in this dissertation include critical disability theory, which critiques dominant power structures and centers the voices of disabled people. And it's used to analyze disability issues from a human rights perspective. And exposing and analyzing ableism is central to critical disability theory. Another theoretical framework I used was social identity theory, which basically says that autism views autism as a social identity, not just a medical diagnosis. Social group members may define themselves and others as members of a particular group based on a variety of characteristics. So, for example, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, etc. And defining oneself as a member of one of these social groups allows people to take social action and engage in both individual and collective strategies of support. A social identity theory approach to autism may be useful as a response to autism stigma. And then the third theoretical framework I pulled from was the minority stress model, which examines health disparities experienced by minoritized groups due to the stressors of social disadvantage. And this model has been used to understand autistic individuals who experience stress due to discrimination and stigma, and reporting worse mental health outcomes as a result. I had 3 primary aims for my research study. The first aim consisted of 2 different research questions. The first question was, how prevalent is social maltreatment of autistic adults in the workplace? And are there group disparities based on race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, or disclosure status of their autism diagnosis or identity? Research question 2, is social maltreatment associated with depression, anxiety, job satisfaction, or camouflaging? And then for aim 2, I had 3 different research questions. What is the prevalence of camouflaging at work? And are there group disparities based on sociodemographic characteristics? Is camouflaging associated with depression, anxiety, or job satisfaction? And then how do autistic employees camouflage at work? And for aim 3, my research question was, what are some potential solutions for improving social treatment of autistic people at work? Okay. So now I am going to talk about my methods that I used. So this study used a convergent mixed methods design, which collects and analyzes qualitative and quantitative data concurrently. I then analyzed quantitative and qualitative data separately, and then converged the data and interpreted it together. And using a mixed methods design just provides a more complete understanding of the research problem than either approach by itself. And data for this dissertation was collected as part of a randomized control effectiveness implementation trial to study the effectiveness and implementation of a novel intervention that our research lab created called Work Chat, a virtual workday. So this data was collected as part of that parent study. And just to dive a little deeper into the qualitative portion of the design, I used a basic qualitative study framework, which is rooted in an interpretive constructivist paradigm, which consists of the belief that multiple realities exist and is interested in how those realities are individually experienced. So at the heart of interpretivism is the notion that individuals are the experts of their own experiences, and our realities are created or perceived according to our own experiences. The transformative worldview is centered around the pursuit of social justice for marginalized groups, for example, disabled people. And it's a form of critical inquiry because it challenges traditional power structures and relationships, but it also is focused on working towards social change. And then for my analytic approach, I used a reflexive thematic analysis, and we used eclectic, inductive, latent coding. So eclectic coding is basically a form of open coding. It allows more flexibility in how you assign codes. You might use some in vivo codes, some process codes, some descriptive codes, for example. And then inductive coding just means that the codes and themes were developed from the data, not based on any pre-existing theory or idea. And then latent coding just means that we went beyond the surface level of the participants' responses and really interpreted the underlying meanings behind what the participants shared. And then the process just describes the 6 phases of reflective thematic analysis. And those are familiarizing yourself with the data, initial open coding, generating themes, and then theme development, review, refining, defining, and naming your themes, and then the write-up. So that was the 6-stage process for reflexive thematic analysis that we used for our qualitative data. My sample was recruited online via social media, email, word of mouth, and via Spark, which is a biomedical autism research database from the Simons Foundation. And our sample included 169 employed autistic adults between 18 and 61 years of age, 76% of whom had a college degree. 76% had reported they had already disclosed their autism at work. 82% reported having a co-occurring disability in addition to autism. 60% reported that they worked in person, with 20% working remotely and 20% with a hybrid work environment. 50% of our sample included people of color, 20% were Hispanic or Latine, 55% identified as female, 16% as non-binary, 5% as transgender, and 62% were LGBTQA+. These are the measures that I used in the study. All measures were self-report surveys. We collected demographic information, of course, And then to measure social maltreatment, I used the autistic microaggressions at work inventory, which I adapted from Shanna's ableist microaggression inventory. I also collected the everyday discrimination scale and the interpersonal conflict at work scale. And then to measure mental health, we used the patient health questionnaire, which measures depression, and the social interaction anxiety scale. And then we also collected several data points on employment. So we asked whether they had disclosed their autism at work. We collected the job satisfaction of persons with disability scale. We collected information on whether they camouflage at work, and if so, how they camouflage at work. And then we also asked them for some potential solutions they have for ways that employers can reduce microaggressions at work towards autistic people. So this is my data analysis plan for AIM-1. So as you can see, for research question 1, I ran 3 different statistical models to see whether socio-demographic characteristics were associated with microaggressions, discrimination, and interpersonal conflict. And then for research question 2, I ran another 3 statistical models to see whether microaggressions, discrimination, and interpersonal conflict were associated with depression, anxiety, job satisfaction, and camouflaging. For AIM-2, I ran 1 statistical model for research question 3 to see whether sociodemographic characteristics were associated with camouflaging. And then for research question 4, I ran 4 different statistical models to see whether camouflaging was associated with depression, anxiety, job satisfaction, and changes in others' behavior towards them when they camouflaged. And then for research question 5, I used reflexive thematic analysis. And for AIM-3 research question 6, I also used reflexive thematic analysis. Okay, so now to talk about my results. I'll go AIM by AIM. So for AIM-1, the hypothesis for research question 1 was that I hypothesized that autistic participants would report experiencing frequent social maltreatment in the workplace, and that autistic individuals with other marginalized identities who have not disclosed their autism diagnosis at work would report experiencing social maltreatment more frequently. And this hypothesis was partially supported. So 88% reported experiencing autistic microaggressions at work during the past month. Specifically, 42% had a coworker act surprised by their professional success because of their autism, and 33% had someone at work treat their accommodations as a burden. And then more frequent report of microaggressions was statistically significantly associated with being of more than one race, being Hispanic or Latina, and disclosing autism at work. So those 3 groups reported experiencing more microaggressions. And then more frequent, people that identified as being in the other racial category reported experiencing fewer microaggressions. When testing whether everyday discrimination was associated with sociodemographic group, the model was not statistically significant. There's several potential reasons for this, which I'll talk about a little bit in the conclusion portion. Same thing with interpersonal conflict by sociodemographic group. This regression model was not statistically significant. The hypothesis for research question 2 was that social maltreatment would predict higher levels of depression, anxiety, and camouflaging, and lower levels of job satisfaction. And the hypothesis for research question 2 was fully supported. So when adjusting for sociodemographic characteristics, microaggressions, discrimination, and interpersonal conflict were all significantly associated with depression, social interaction anxiety, and camouflaging, and were negatively associated with job satisfaction. So the more social maltreatment someone experienced, the higher their depression scores, the higher their anxiety scores, the more they camouflaged, and the lower their job satisfaction was. The hypothesis for research question 3 was that autistic participants would report camouflaging frequently, and autistic participants with other marginalized identities will report camouflaging even more. And this hypothesis was partially supported. So 90% of participants reported engaging in camouflaging to disguise their autism at work, while 49% reported that they noticed changes in others' behavior when they did camouflage at work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But when we talk about camouflaging by group, there were no significant associations between camouflaging and race, camouflaging and ethnicity, camouflaging and sexual orientation, or camouflaging and autism disclosure. However, there were significant associations found between camouflaging and being female, being non-binary, and being transgender. So those three groups reported more camouflaging at work. And this is consistent with some other studies that have shown that autistic females are more likely than men to camouflage in order to get by in more formal settings, like work settings. The hypothesis for research question 4 was that participants' camouflaging scores will predict higher levels of depression, anxiety, changes in others' behavior, and lower levels of job satisfaction. And this hypothesis was partially supported. So the models for camouflaging in depression and camouflaging in job satisfaction were not significant. However, when testing whether camouflaging was associated with social interaction anxiety, the model was statistically significant. And so when adjusting for sociodemographic characteristics, more frequent reporting of camouflaging was significantly associated with more social interaction anxiety. With the qualitative data, like I mentioned, reflexive thematic analysis was conducted, and I had the help of a brilliant research assistant who identifies as neurodivergent. And with this data, participants were asked how they camouflage their autism at work. And when we were going through the data, we found 5 major themes as to how and why autistic employees camouflage at work. These included camouflaging as a response to encountering prejudice and or abuse, which had a sub-theme of having a fear of retaliation or judgment. The second major theme was camouflaging as a way of coping, which had sub-themes of accommodating self, minimizing self, and keeping to self. The third major theme we found was camouflaging as a response to being silenced. So this had sub-themes of being verbally silenced, being physically silenced, being emotionally silenced, having their sensory needs silenced, having their skills disregarded or blocked, which just means not feeling like they could share their ideas, and having their special interests silenced. The fourth major theme was camouflaging as compulsory production of extra labor. So this had sub-themes of planning ahead, where participants reported having to write out scripts or practice conversations in advance, being hyper-aware constantly, forcing communication, being expected to manage holistic discomfort, forcing engagement or participation, and enduring emotional labor participation, which resulted in stress, overwhelm, exhaustion, burnout, and anxiety. And then finally, our fifth major theme was camouflaging as forced repression of identity, which included sub-themes of engaging in mandatory pleasantness, maintaining a customer service persona, maintaining a professional image, enduring harm towards intersecting identities, withholding disclosure of autistic identity, and forced mirroring of others. And so I'm just going to go through a few of the quotes that we received for each of these themes. So the first theme that I mentioned that emerged was camouflaging as a response to encountering prejudice or abuse. And within this theme, one participant shared, I generally keep to myself and don't like to leave my office, partly because I am afraid others will notice that there is anything off or different about me. Another participant shared, I don't disclose my autism diagnosis and try hard not to act autistic. And then a third participant shared, I always mask. It is automatic for me due to early and severe childhood abuse. I have spent significant time in therapy to work on not masking automatically. And then for the second theme, which was camouflaging as a way of coping, participants shared experiences of finding ways to accommodate themselves, minimize themselves, or keep to themselves. Regarding finding ways of accommodating themselves, one participant shared, I wear headphones to listen to music regularly to reduce my auditory stimuli and distractions. Another participant shared, I will give a reasonable excuse as to why I won't participate in certain activities. I will take a break, hide in the restroom when I need to regroup myself versus have a meltdown. And then a third participant shared, I work remotely, so I do not always have to mask. So there were a couple people that talked about having the freedom to unmask in certain work environments. If their coworkers were supportive of them or if they felt like they knew them well. The third theme was camouflaging as a response to being silenced. And within this theme, one participant shared, I sometimes fake my reactions so they sound more excited or positive, or don't reveal my real thoughts or feelings about something. Another participant shared in regards to having their special interests silenced. They said, I avoid speaking about my special interests. I was taught at a young age to avoid conversation about the things that I like most because I tend to speak about them at great length or get overly animated. And then another participant shared their experience of having their skills disregarded or blocked. They said, I try not to improve processes, procedures that would be optimal, easier, safer, as coworkers take that as a personal attack. So even when they have good ideas that might help the business or the company, sometimes they choose not to share those ideas. And then within the theme of camouflaging as compulsory production of extra labor, participants discussed experiences of meeting expectations for emotional labor, forcing engagement and participation, expectations for managing holistic discomfort, forced communication, being hyper-aware, and planning ahead. And this theme included anecdotes such as, I used to work overtime to make sure I did everything correctly. Another participant shared, I put in a huge amount of time and effort into composing emails, etc. And then one participant simply shared that it would take me too much time and effort to explain in depth all of the different ways I was masking autism at work. And then finally, for the fifth major theme, which was camouflaging as forced repression of identity, one participant shared, I do my best to put on a professional image, even when things are extremely challenging or I'm overwhelmed. Another participant stated, I try to act like a neurotypical so it makes customers more comfortable. And then a third participant said, I mask by always being pleasant and not making any problems. So I mentioned that we collected data on whether participants noticed a change in others' behavior towards them when they camouflaged. And when testing whether camouflaging was associated with changes in others' behavior, the statistical model showed that for each 1 unit increase in camouflaging frequency, participants were nearly 3 times more likely to notice a change in others' behavior towards them. And this just dives in a little bit deeper to that. So the qualitative data identified that 81% of participants reported that others were more likely to act more positively towards them when they camouflage. So they were more likely to engage with them. They were nicer, friendlier, and more polite. And then only 2 participants shared that people acted more negatively towards them when they camouflaged, and 8 participants shared that people were neutral or it depended on the situation. And I just want to highlight some of these quotes. So for people that acted more positively towards them when they camouflaged, one person said, my career is better when I mask. When I don't mask, people think I'm unfriendly, combative, unengaged. These are specific things that have been brought up in my reviews. And then another participant shared, if I am masking, usually people smile at me more, engage with me more, and like me better. When I am unmasked, people avoid me. I don't really know how to unmask at work at this point because the mask is the only thing that makes sure I stay employed. We also asked participants for some ideas on potential solutions that employers could implement in order to reduce social maltreatment of autistic employees. And 90% of participants agreed that employers should provide education to allistic employees on the harms of autism microaggressions. 85% agreed that employers should provide bystander training to allistic employees to support autistic coworkers who experience microaggressions. And 72% disagreed that autistic people would benefit from programs that teach professionalism and social norms in the workplace. And here you can see when I integrated the quantitative and qualitative data. So when we asked whether employers should educate employees on the harm of autistic microaggressions, a large percentage agreed or strongly agreed. And the qualitative data backed that up with one participant sharing that one thing employers could do is to make sure that employees have access to info on autism and have talks with them if needed. Another participant shared, I would imagine just education and pointing out what they are, what microaggressions are, is a big step in the right direction. And then similarly, when asked, how much do you agree that employers should provide bystander training? The majority agreed or strongly agreed again, and one participant shared that employers could require non-discriminating and bystander training that includes examples of people with different communication styles and mannerisms. General information should be shared on multiple formats and noted as so employees recognize that there are different ways to learning and communicating. And qualitative analysis for this data showed that, or it resulted in 2 major themes for potential solutions that employers could engage in. The first major theme was to address allistic deficiencies in empathy. So this included sub-themes like be patient with autistic people, be willing to push through your own discomfort, ask questions with good faith, don't retaliate for exhibiting autistic traits, don't avoid autistic people, don't bully, don't gaslight, don't stereotype, don't hate, don't infantilize, don't pretend to want to include autistic people, and lastly, stop overwhelming autistic people with your lack of empathy. And then the second major theme identified was for employers to value diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some of these sub-themes were to celebrate neurodiversity, don't establish a standard of neuronormativity, have and provide knowledge about autism, listen to autistic voices, and have autistic leadership in your organizations, treat autistic people as equals, utilize universal design, and respond to discrimination when it does occur. So just in conclusion, I want to just briefly go over my findings again. AIM 1 findings included that more frequent microaggressions was associated with being of more than one race, being Hispanic or Latina, and disclosing autism at work. And more microaggressions was negatively associated with being in the other racial category. And then microaggressions, discrimination, and interpersonal conflict were all significantly associated with depression, anxiety, and camouflaging, and resulted in lower job satisfaction. For AIM 2, we found that more frequent report of camouflaging was associated with being female, non-binary, and transgender, and that camouflaging at work was significantly associated with social interaction anxiety specifically. And when camouflaging, autistic participants were nearly 3 times more likely to notice changes in others' behavior towards them. And participants reported camouflaging at work as a response to encountering prejudice or abuse, as a way of coping, as a response to being silenced, through the compulsory production of extra labor, and through repression of identity. And then for AIM 3, we found that the majority agreed that employers should provide education to holistic employees on the harms of autism microaggressions, and that employers should provide bystander training to holistic employees to support their autistic coworkers. And 72% disagreed that autistic people would benefit from programs that teach professionalism and social norms in the workplace. And some potential solutions for employers included addressing holistic deficiencies in empathy and valuing DEI. So some of the implications of this study for research policy and practice include that there is a need for more longitudinal research on long-term workplace outcomes for autistic employees. So things like job loss, pay, length of employment, et cetera. There's also a need for more disability scholarship in both social work and psychology. Autism, there has been a call for autism to be a grand challenge for social work. There has also been a call for the joining of disability studies into the field of psychology. And there's also a need for alignment in research on how we measure social maltreatment and how we talk about social maltreatment. So, for example, microaggressions, bullying, discrimination, workplace incivility, there needs to be some type of agreement or alignment or consensus on how we measure these things and talk about these things. And also, researchers just need to be aware of the ASPIRE guidelines, which stands for Academic Autism Spectrum Partnership in Research and Education. And this is a group out of, I believe, Portland State University that provides guidelines for how to include autistic co-researchers and participants in research. As far as policy, there should be some incentives for employers to strengthen workplace protections and anti-discrimination policies. For example, follow through on disciplinary actions for bullying and harassment. And then federal policies should explicitly address the mental health impact of social maltreatment and camouflaging among autistic people. For practice, employers should integrate autism training into their standard human resource practices and procedures. They should focus on creating autism-friendly workplaces, things like offering flexible hybrid schedules, sensory-friendly environments, mental health breaks, and inclusive job design. And these results also demonstrate a need for the development of interventions for autistic mental health that address the burden of camouflaging and social maltreatment. And autistic adults have called for focusing on autistic strengths and changing the narrative around autism and normalizing autistic functioning. And this includes the training of autism-informed therapists. And then across research policy and practice, I think it's important that intersectional identities be centered in workplace inclusion efforts, because the vulnerability of these multiply marginalized groups is obviously compounded across identities. There were some limitations of the study. One was just its cross-sectional design. So all of the data was collected within a couple week time frame. And so, you know, obviously it would be helpful to have some more longitudinal studies that are looking at these things over time. Also, a significant portion of the sample was recruited from Spark. I think it was about half of the sample. And so, you know, these results might not be generalizable to people that are not interested in participating in biomedical or genetic autism research, or people that self-identify as having autism versus having a medical diagnosis. Also, the findings might not be generalizable to non-college educated or early career individuals. Most of these people were college educated and fairly advanced in their careers. And then the camouflaging measure was just a single item. And so that limited us a little bit in the types of analysis that we could do, and I think definitely played a part in the results that we found. There is a validated measure of autistic camouflaging available, which I wasn't aware of at the time that I designed the study. But going forward, I definitely would make use of that measure to measure autistic camouflaging. And then lastly, it might have been challenging for the participants to differentiate between autism microaggressions and microaggressions that they experience due to their other identities. So, you know, it's not always clear why someone is using a microaggression towards you. So I think there needs to be a little bit more intersectionality needs to be taken into consideration when developing additional measures for measuring microaggressions. So in conclusion, we know that autistic employees face significant workplace challenges, and that social maltreatment at work is significantly associated with mental health, depression and anxiety specifically, more camouflaging, and lower job satisfaction. And we also know that camouflaging is not a long-term solution, that workplace cultures must change. And employers should take active steps to foster inclusion and provide psychological safety for their employees. And also there is a need for interventions, I think, that focus on autistic mental health and that take into account the social maltreatment that autistic people experience and the effects of camouflaging. So I first just want to thank all of my study participants that were so willing to share themselves and their experiences with me. I know that's not easy. I also want to thank my dissertation committee, which is Matthew Smith, Henry Wellman, Shanna Katari, and Connie Sung, who have been with me pretty much the entire 7 years that I've been at University of Michigan. And also my kids, parents, family, and friends, and the Level Up Lab research staff who helped me collect this data. I could not have done this without them. And also Dr. Jane Burke-Miller, who answered a lot of my statistical questions, and then Debbie Erickson, who helped me analyze the qualitative data, and National Institute of Mental Health, who funded the parent study that this data came from. And with that, I'm happy to open it up to questions, comments, etc. Whatever you have for me.
Thanks so much, Kari. Just to start off, I would just say congratulations. You did a great job with your presentation of your story and data. And so just take a deep breath right now.
I've been doing that all day, don't worry.
Yeah. No, you sound very relaxed. So you did a great job. Um, uh, and so typically what we do now is we just open it up for questions first from the dissertation committee, and then we could take open questions after that. After that, we will sequester the dissertation committee to have a conversation and then rejoin you. So let's start with the committee. Do folks have any questions that they would ask about?
I do.
Go ahead, Henry.
You surprised, Kari?
I'm not surprised, no.
Um, well, I have several. I don't know how you want to proceed, Matt, with regards to, how many questions from one person before we move on, but
You want to do sections or person or rotation?
yeah.
I think a fair approach could just be we'll just do kind of one question at a time, and then I'll monitor just by amount of time, just to make sure everybody gets equal time asking questions.
Yeah. Well, I have several more minor questions, but let me just get my big question out. So your data are a pretest
Mhm.
for this intervention study, right? The
Correct.
intervention study with work chat.
Yes.
And I looked a little at work chat, and it seems to me that one way of describing it is tutorials on how to mask in the workplace, how to do the kinds of things that would make it easier for autistic people to approach you or be a coworker, or in sales, for example, to ask you about sales.
Yes.
So that leads to an interesting question
Mhm.
with regards to your data.
Mhm.
So two related questions here. One is, would you say that your data sort of undermine the attempt to do this work chat stuff? That would undermine a whole lot of Matt's Matt's efforts.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good question.
and would you say, and have you collected, for example, in your pretest data here, ways in which in the course of employing something like work chat, you can mitigate some of these things that you find to be suspect with
Mhm.
regards to masking. You,
Mhm.
if performed correctly or informed correctly in the course of work chat, you could mitigate, for example, participants' negative experiences about masking.
Mhm.
You could mitigate their the possible association with job satisfaction. It could be more satisfying somehow.
Mhm.
So have you guys thought about that, or talked
Yeah.
about that, or how work chat could be used not just to increase employment and longevity of employment, but
Mhm.
also job satisfaction in the face of being taught to mask.
Mhm. Yes, we have definitely thought about and talked about that a lot, obviously. In fact, when I, as you know, made the transition from my original dissertation prospectus to this current one, that was something I was wrestling with internally a lot. I think part of the answer is that, you know, obviously the long-term goal is to try to reach for more autism acceptance and inclusivity, and for there to be more education among employers and coworkers, to be able to do that. However, that is a very, very long-term and very challenging goal. Obviously, there are going to be people that are resistant to that idea and who might never come around to being accepting of people that are different than them. And I mean, obviously, we all know that. But so I think the answer is that, you know, more acceptance and more education and more inclusion is a long-term goal. But in the short term, autistic people are having to go out and survive right now, like today. So before any of that education and acceptance is going to take root, they need strategies that help them remain employed or obtain employment. Like one participant noted in the study that their masking is the only thing that's keeping them employed right now. And so that is the strategy that they are having to use currently in order to provide for themselves. And that's not ideal, but there are things that people go through every day where we have to make choices, difficult choices, on what we're going to do to survive. And unfortunately, masking and camouflaging is that thing for autistic people right now. Unfortunately, it's detrimental to their mental health. So in the long term, I would like to see more education and more acceptance and more inclusion. And I'm going to keep pushing for that. But at the same time, I do understand the current reality might call for them to continue masking in the short term if it keeps them safe and it keeps them employed and it helps them reach their goals. As far as whether it undermines work chat, I can't speak for the whole team that was part of designing work chat, but I know if I could go back and do it over again, there are certain things that I would incorporate into the intervention that are not in there currently. And so, you know, that might be something that we look at in the future when we adapt it. This is the first study that we've evaluated work chat, and so this is the first time that we've evaluated it. And so, you know, adaptations are inevitable. I know personally, one thing that I would add into it is I would talk about masking and camouflaging and how, you know, we know this is not the ideal solution, and we know that this might be difficult for you or harmful for you. But we also understand that, you know, right now, largely the majority of people in the world are not educated about autism, and they're not very inclusive and they're not very accepting. And so until we can change that, I think we're going to have to balance using both strategies in order to help people reach their goals.
Thanks, Kari. And just as I really appreciate your kind of well-processed response to Henry's question. You've clearly thought about it quite a bit, and we've had our own conversations. And just as a direct follow-up, perhaps you can speak a little bit about how the intention around designing work chat was for a particular section, not section, a particular subgroup of the autism community who is a very different population than who completed this study on microaggressions, and how that sort of informs some of the work we still kind of need to do.
Yeah, so work chat was originally developed for transition age youth. So people that are in high school or post-secondary programs that are in like the 16 to 24 year age range, that might be just thinking about getting their first job. As we all know, with COVID, we had to kind of shift our delivery, and we ended up doing this online arm of the study that included autistic adults, because that was the age group that I was interested in studying. However, I think, in a perfect world, we probably would have adapted the intervention to be more targeted towards that age group before delivering it to them. But there was something else I was going to say too, and I can't remember what it was. Also, what kind of instigated the creation of work chat was following our other job interview intervention that we had created for autistic transition age youth. There was there was a call from some of our stakeholders that we needed to go one step further, and rather than only addressing job interview skills, we need to address like workplace communication skills. And so it was created based on feedback that we had received from stakeholders. And even in this data that I shared, there was a small percentage of people that still agree that there is some need for social skills training or professionalism training. But again, that might be something that's more suitable for transition age youth that are just looking at getting their first job, that are kind of unfamiliar with the world of work, if you will. And so, yeah.
Thanks, Kari. And then just wanted to ask Shan or Connie if they have questions.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I just want to kind of close the loop on this is that, when we come from this constructionist point of view, right, like all of these things can be true. And that's the lovely thing about using that as our paradigm in which we're in this is like, yes, should our world be less less ableist? Should it be more inclusive of all different neurotypes and ways of being? Yes. And in our capitalistic world, especially with what's going on with SSA right now, do people need access to employment and funds to, cover, put a roof over their head and eat food and do that? Yes. Do young people need access to professionalism skills? Yes. And should we also be trying to dismantle the idea of professionalism, which comes out of white supremacy and ableism? Yes, right? And we can say yes to all of these things and tackle these in very different ways. And so I want to, which is what you all are saying, and I think you're also dancing around it in this very gentle and thoughtful way.
No, you say it much better.
Right? It's also like, yes, right? Like we need all of these things. And I have racialized students who we talk about code switching. I have trans students who we talk about, do you put your pronouns on your CV or not? Like we are all doing these things.
Yeah.
And so I think that even just naming that in work chat to say like, wow, we live in a world that has expectations that might not be in line with how your brain works. Here's how to do it in this way, and how can we also help you, advocate for accommodations and your needs to be met? How can we help you find jobs that are a better fit? Maybe a remote job is going to be a better fit. And here's how to deal with, masking on Teams meetings. Not everybody wants a ton of emojis. So, I just want to like name that you're already coming from this paradigm, which then kind of leads into my first question, which is, you mentioned critical disability studies or discrit.
Mm-hmm.
In reading your paper, I think you put in your dissertation, I think there was like 2 sentences about disability justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm seeing or feeling that in both the framing, which again is also challenging because you're coming into an existing study, and so
Yeah.
framing things is
Right.
often a challenge. I had some questions about how did you ask about gender, and I'm sure it was
Right.
just already set up.
Yeah.
But I'd really like you to think about and maybe share a little bit about how your findings can be better integrated using a discrit and a DJ framing.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely could. I read over your comments, and I mean, you're absolutely right. There could definitely be more mention of both of those things. I will just say that this paradigm shift kind of just, I would say I'm relatively new to looking at things this way. As you know, like I made a big shift like a year or two ago from just how I look at everything and how I'm approaching everything. And so kind of having to go back and do the work and the research on these topics. Um, I've only been really doing that for like the past year and a half. And so while I am getting into this line of thinking more, and it's absolutely resonating with me. And as you all know, I'm a mom of autistic kids. And so the older they get, the more I realize how important these things are. For their experience as well. And so I'm educating myself, but it takes a while to kind of make that paradigm shift and make that switch. And
So
uh,
take a breath
this was
because
my first attempt.
no, this is great. This is great. It's so what I want in this conversation right now
Uh-huh.
is thinking about your findings and thinking about what we know about, the 10 tenets of disability justice. Let's just start there,
Mhm.
right? Like, how do these findings support DJ? Are there
Mhm.
ways that using a DJ, so for folks who are not as familiar, disability justice is a framework that comes out of Black and Brown disabled communities, also primarily queer and trans. So really bringing in that intersectionality is the #1 tenet of
Yeah.
disability justice, which you mentioned, right? And so, like, I think some of these tenets are already here. So I'm
Mhm.
wondering, with just what you know so far, dipping your toe in, welcome.
Yeah.
How
Thank
do
you.
these findings kind of map onto that for you?
Well, I think definitely one of their tenets of capitalism, like anti-capitalism, I think I could definitely tap into that more, especially this being a study that's being done in the workplace. I think that's an important piece of it. And I think I can incorporate that into the portion of my dissertation that's on, the whole history of work and um, the history of work among disabled people specifically. So yeah, I definitely could look into that more. Um, that's the one that pops out to me off the top of my head. Um, I do want to look into um, this was something I thought about, but I didn't include it as part of this study. But I definitely want to look into why the discrimination and interpersonal conflict models were not um, significant with microaggressions. I feel like there's something there that I'm missing when it comes to, the intersectionality of race and autism and gender. And
That like something that might be worth looking to is like when people have to choose their most salient identity in any space, right? And they're
Right.
like, which one of the, if I'm thinking
Right.
about autistic microaggressions, but I just got misgendered, right?
Mhm.
In that
Yeah,
moment, my trans identity is going to be much more salient.
right.
And I'm like, and the question is, did somebody say something that judged my efficacy or my skills? I'm probably going to be like, yeah, because I'm trans, not
Mhm.
right. And so a lot of those discrimination things also, anyways, we can have it's a whole conversation, right? How do we look at
Yeah.
discrimination, which has
Well,
historically been used in very specific contexts, and
right.
then also extrapolate it to things like autism.
Yeah, and I will say, like, the microaggression measure was specific to autism and specific to the workplace. The everyday discrimination scale was not. Um, so they could have interpreted that as discrimination towards any one of their identities or,
Exactly.
um, and it wasn't specific to the workplace context at all. And then the interpersonal conflict at work was specific to the workplace setting, but not specific to other identities. So I think it might be worthwhile to collect data on discrimination towards each identity individually, or something like
Sounds
that.
like you have a whole career ahead of you. The last thing I just wanted to pull in with the DJ stuff is your findings around people wanting their bosses and their colleagues to be better trained around autism
Mhm.
feels like a piece of interdependence, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was
that,
as much
mhm,
like I need to change myself
mhm,
in this space, but if we
right.
can develop mutual understanding of who I am,
Mhm,
and I think that from a social work, I can't speak as much from a psych point of view, but right, this idea of how do we support one another, right? Because most coworkers and employers, I'm assuming, don't want to be harming people in their
mhm,
spaces, right? Like that's, not that goal. And so thinking about, how can we frame things like, the wholeness of the person, dignity and worth of a person. A lot of DJ maps really well onto social work.
yeah.
I think it could also map really well if you come from this like strength-based approach of
Mhm.
employers want to do their best for their employees. I mean, usually, right, within the confines of capitalism,
Theoretically, yeah.
right? And people want to be kind and, and want their coworkers to be as effective and supportive as possible because they want to be effective and supportive. So, I wonder what it would look like to have more like intergroup relation styles dialogue around autism rather than just a like, here's what autism is
Mhm.
101 or something like that, where, both groups are working with and training and interdependent with one another rather than relying either on autistic people getting job training or
Mhm.
holistic people getting an autism training.
Yes, yes. Yeah, one of the qualitative findings that really stuck out to me was um, having autistic people in leadership and having autistic people lead the education or lead the trainings. And so um, going forward, if I develop these interventions that I'm wanting to develop, I definitely want to bring in autistic adults from the beginning and have them co-create these interventions with me, and take their feedback into
Leadership of the most
consideration.
impacted, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Another so the reason I'm poking you around this discrit and especially the DJ piece is I think you're saying these things with it that map on so well, and I think it will
yeah,
strengthen your findings and your next steps.
yeah.
I yield my time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I ask just one question that's a kind of partial follow-up to the?
Yes, just real quick, and then we want to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
space.
Yeah. In your data, how many, or did you ask, or do you have any sense of how many autistic people were in that workplace? In that work unit or the larger thing?
Oh, so
Were
like if
they
they had autistic
typically the only
colleagues,
one?
yeah, we did not collect that information, but yeah, that would definitely be interesting to look into in the future for sure. Some people did mention, that they felt comfortable in their workplace setting enough to be able to unmask around their coworkers because their coworkers were accepting or more familiar with them. Or one person did mention that there were other autistic colleagues that they worked with. But we didn't really collect any quantitative data on that.
Thanks.
Thanks, Connie.
Hi, Kari. Wonderful job on the presentation and also the write-up. I have a question more related to integrating the quantitative and qualitative data because
Yeah.
your dissertation like title is mixed method, and I think you did a very nice job on both qualitative and quantitative data analysis. But when I looked at how you're like using the joint display table and integrating the results, number one, I think it could be more in-depth because you did a nice job like coming up with all the themes and sub-themes for from the qualitative data, and also you have pretty rich quantitative data. So let me give you an example. And hold on. In one of the integration, you were talking about how the social interaction anxiety relate to the camouflaging. So you use example about, let's look at the everyday discrimination. So I know your intention was trying to see how participants camouflage because of the everyday discrimination experience, but the examples that you listed, like for example, it says, my supervisors and coworkers are aware of the autism diagnosis, but they are not accommodating. Instead, they talk to me like I'm stupid, treat me like I'm not capable of my duties. So to me, that quote, meaning it doesn't really show from that quote how they camouflage. And then from the anxiety standpoint, the quote that you use, they're hiding the anxiety, um, and their confusion as much as possible. But I was hoping like you will look at like how they camouflage because of certain things that is causing the anxiety. That's why they're doing certain behavior. So basically what I'm trying to say is you're stating a lot of the quantitative and qualitative data, but like how you tie those back to the themes and sub-themes rather than just pulling some of the frequency data and then use the quote to illustrate it, because the section that you're on, the mixed method analysis and interpretation, I see there are a lot of rich data that you could use to use that up and make it more in-depth.
Yeah, I agree. That was something I struggled with, where to draw the line, but for time's sake, I decided to draw it where I did. But one thing that I tossed around and thought about was actually looking at more of the demographic information, and kind of mapping that onto the qualitative data to see if there were any differences in the qualitative responses based on race or gender or something like that. And so I'll have to look at the specific parts that you're referencing to be able to talk more about that, because I don't have it pulled up right now, but yeah, I definitely did think about kind of expanding the integration portion more, and going a little bit further into that. So that's something that I think I will look at doing prior to publishing, and see if I can expand on that part of it.
As you mentioned demographics, can a quick follow-up? When you do the quantitative, did you code the demographics by the dummy variables? And then like the race, you have different racial category. Did you code each of those in its own dummy variable before you?
No, that's what I will have to do in order to do this further analysis. And that's kind of why I drew the line where I did, because it would have required a lot more data management and rearranging and recoding. And so, yeah, that's something that I hope to take time to do in the future.
So let's put aside the mixed method. What I'm asking is the regression, because
Mhm.
a lot of your analysis involve that regression model, and then
Mhm.
you have multiple categories for race, for gender, for all those. From a regression standpoint, when you
Mhm.
have those multiple categories, you're
Mhm.
supposed to have, because not in the dissertation, but in your presentation, I see your reference group is white, for example,
Mhm.
for race.
Yeah. Mhm.
So when you do the analysis, did you have like the black group compared to white, and then the Hispanic group compared to white, and then the multiracial group compared to white when you do the regression?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I do have that.
Okay, good. I just want,
Yeah.
because if you do have that, I would say make sure you explicitly say that in the dissertation, number one. Number two, like how you create a dummy code for each of those, and then you
Okay.
write as
Okay.
questions. Otherwise, people would think that you just dump it all into the regression model, and that would be a mistake.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Um, are you each sending me, I know Shanna, I already have yours, but and Matt, I think I already have yours. But are you gonna send me the Word document with your comments and suggestions? Like Connie, for example, is that like, did you write that into your
Yeah.
feedback? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So, because I'm new to the system, so I put in all of those in bullet points in the whatever is the system is called. But I also have a Word document that I can send you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I don't know where to access that the web-based version of
Okay.
the, I don't know if I have access to that. I would have to check.
If you don't, Matt, or I can easily download it for you and send it over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, all it sent me was a PDF of the final exam report thing that you guys have to sign.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just make sure to have Connie send you a copy of her thoughts.
Okay.
Okay, and then we can circle back to Henry. Henry, would you like to ask another question?
Yeah. This is more, well, I'd like to hear more what you think about the fact that so many of your participants didn't answer.
Yeah.
That's like about 25%
Mm-hmm.
are there and
Yeah.
everywhere. And it was like 25% even on the disclosure thing. They just didn't say.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of missing data. And as far as I could tell, you appropriately handled the missing data in your analyses.
Mm-hmm.
But I think beyond analytically, what's your idea? How come there's so much missing data? How come there was so much refusal to answer these things?
Yeah, so when I was looking at Shanna's comments, they had the same comment. And there is one sentence in the dissertation that kind of explains why, but I think I need to make it more obvious or move it up into the methods section, because I think it's down in the discussion section right now. But so the reason is that the surveys were kind of sent out in batches via email. And the workplace survey, which included the disclosure item, the camouflaging items, the potential solutions items, all of the qualitative data, that was sent out a couple of weeks after the microaggression survey, the discrimination survey, the interpersonal conflict survey, the depression, anxiety, all those other scales. And so that's why there's so much missing information from that one that one survey that contains all those employment questions is because it was sent out at a different time. And I think by then, you know, that portion of people had kind of moved on or decided that they didn't want to fill out any more surveys. And so that's why those specific items are missing data. When you're doing it by email, I mean, we send reminders like, hey, will you please fill this out? But ultimately we can't force them to fill it out. So if
We
they,
make it clear that it was an attrition of an entire survey rather than
yes,
thing to not fill out certain items would be
yes.
very helpful in framing it, because Henry, I absolutely was like, how can you?
I just think you should clarify that in the write-up.
Yeah, okay, yeah,
So sort of like respondent fatigue, because it's these things that got asked later.
right,
That's
Yeah.
true. Okay.
yep.
Thanks, Henry. And then Shanna, did you have another question?
Yeah, okay. So big picture question. And please correct me if I misinterpreted this. To participate in the survey, they had to prove diagnosis of autism.
Mm-hmm. Or score meet the cutoff for the
SRS.
autism
Oh,
quotient.
AQ. Yeah.
Yeah,
So my question is, many autistic folks, including autistic therapists, are moving towards the MIGNIS and other scales that are not normed on cishet white boys.
yeah,
And lots of people who have self-diagnosed are unable to access professional diagnosis due to cost, due to extremely long wait lists. And so that really tends to impact people who are adults, particularly who are and underemployed, folks of color, queer and trans folks, multiply disabled folks. Then you
Yeah.
also, so my question is who you think is missing, right? Like who was not included
yeah,
in this work? If we're guessing that people who have had, trouble in their jobs and are underemployed and therefore can't afford to get a diagnosis now, right? I'm just it wasn't really discussed in the limitations section, and so I'd like you to
Yeah.
kind of think, A, who's missing, and B, how do we do, and this is an ongoing discussion. I don't expect you to have like the one true answer, because again, there's no such thing as one true answers.
Mhm.
How do we do meaningful autistic research that is inclusive of all autistic people while also understanding that not all autism researchers recognize self-diagnosis or recognize MIGDIS, or all of these things. So how do we do this work in a way that is inclusive of the community, inclusive particularly of groups that have less access to resources, and also grounded in where the science is currently?
Yeah, I think that's a huge debate in autism research right now, right? Obviously, people that we're missing from this study is anyone that has not had access to a medical diagnosis, people that self-identify as autistic. Um, I I fully support including people that self-identify or people that have been diagnosed using the MIGDIS in research. This study in particular was funded by NIH, so sometimes they have limitations on who you can include in their studies and what documentation you require and things like that. I'm not sure if that was the particular case for this parent study. Matt can speak to that probably, but NIH is a lot more stringent on who you can include and what you can ask and all of those types of things. I think moving forward, researchers are going to have to commit to including people that self-identify also, because like you mentioned, people might not have access to a medical diagnosis due to funding or geographical concerns or distrust of the medical community in general. There's a whole host of reasons, and especially for autistic adults who have already gone through you know, a big chunk of their lives managing this on their own, they might think, well, I don't need a medical diagnosis. Like I've already figured out how to manage this. And so, you know, I think those are all important considerations
Yeah.
anytime you're designing a research study. And I think a lot of it depends on who's providing the funding and how much latitude you have in making those decisions yourself as a researcher.
Yeah.
And I'm not
I
sure
would
if I
say you
left
might-
anything out.
You
Or
might
if,
also look at kind of older stuff around trans folks.
okay,
Because like late 90s, 2000s, it was also very much like you need at the time it was gender identity disorder, and now it's gender dysphoria, but this idea
right.
that you weren't really trans until you had a diagnosis.
Okay.
I wonder if there's space for that. Before you start submitting papers, let's talk, because I
Okay.
think you're trying to say that you're coming from a discrit or disability justice perspective, and then you're also
Right.
you required a medical diagnosis or this in these ways. I think you're going to get a lot of reviewer pushback. So
Yeah.
I want you to plant that seed, and we'll talk about it when we get there.
Yeah. Sure.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Kari. And I would just add in, you know, part of our effort to include those that don't have the resources for a diagnosis was why we did the SRS-2. I think we did the AQ for this particular online study, but typically we do the SRS-2, which has a much more diverse sample in terms of its the normality scores or whatever, the
Validation.
normative data. Yeah. But I agree that AQ is much more of a historically, it's based on white data. And then there was one other thing I was gonna kind of highlight, but I think we're yeah, I just don't remember. I'll bring it back up if I remember.
Just email me.
Yeah. Well, it was a follow-on to this nice conversation that we're having on this particular point. But and then thank you, Shannon. And then Connie, did you have a follow-up question you also wanted to ask?
Not really a question, but just a comment. I think you did a nice job in the implication section. It's very thorough. What I
Okay.
would suggest is because you have implication for like research, employers, mental health professionals, since your focus in here is vocational. So I would suggest like add a paragraph to kind of highlight the implication specifically for vocational rehab practitioners.
Yeah. Great idea. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Henry, do you have any other questions?
Well, I just had one suggestion, but it's a suggestion that would provoke a reaction.
Okay. I'm ready.
Yeah. So, it seems to me that when it comes to masking and something like work chat, which is trying to teach you sort of how to successfully mask, one of the possible ways you could mitigate some of the harmful effects that you've potentially outlined is that you could treat learning how to mask as a challenge, as something that you would get satisfaction out of for doing well, sort of like on a physical training kind of thing, you know. Right now, it might struggle to get these weights and stuff, but you could get satisfaction about getting better at it, and especially if you knew that getting better at it meant that you're more likely to get and or retain a job or to be satisfied with your thing. Just what would your thoughts be about that? That it could be approached as a It could be approached as a challenge that has its potential payoffs,
Yeah.
not just an issue that has its potential downsides.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be okay to present it in that way, like, hey, these are some strategies you can use that might help you get a job or keep a job or have better job satisfaction or better relationships with people at work, yada yada. As long as it's prefaced with, you know, this might also come with some challenges and come with some um, impacts to your mental health, which will then need addressed separately. But that's not the intention of this intervention specifically. But I think maybe just having that warning, if you will, about what the potential impacts of doing this long term might be, or something to that effect. I think it would be okay as long as there's balance and as long as we're upfront with recognizing both the benefits and the harms of camouflaging.
Thanks, Kari. And I would just add on that, just to contextualize that, this dissertation data again is really looking at the relationship between camouflaging and mental health and microaggressions and mental health in a highly educated sample that are in largely professional positions. And the intervention was designed for folks that are transition age youth who are in employment services, which is a very different population. So we would still need to look at that question of masking, mental health, microaggressions and mental health in this younger population to draw those to better understand what that relationship is among those younger folks. So I think that's an important thing to contextualize as we, continue engaging in this really enlightening conversation. So,
And we do have that data.
But you'd have the data, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It just wasn't part of my dissertation, but
No,
yes, we do have
understood.
that data. And then we also have a small portion of our sample that was unemployed, that we might, I'm sure we're going to look at that data as well, but I didn't include it for my dissertation.
yeah, and here I haven't asked too many questions myself. I would just maybe not so much a question, but I also like a curiosity as you begin to build this literature for yourself, is to also be thinking about microaggressions by job type and the type of job that these folks are in, because we have that dictionary of occupational such and such from the Department of Labor
Yeah.
that might be informative as well. If there
Yeah.
are job types where there might be more microaggressions than others.
And just so everybody else knows, we collected data on job title. So we do have that data. And then something else that I am interested in looking at is we collected data on co-occurring disabilities. And so I'm also interested in kind of diving into that a little bit further and seeing if any co-occurring disabilities has any effect on any of these outcomes as well.
One thing for each of those, and that I don't have any more questions. Mine are just based on those two comments. One, did you collect who perpetrated the microaggressions, like coworkers, customers, or bosses?
No.
Because I think I have a partner who's autistic. I have two partners who are autistic, three partners who are autistic, but one of them was a barista for a long time, right? And so their microaggressions mostly occurred from customers, right?
Right.
But work at, in the university system, and their microaggressions are occurring from their boss and their coworkers. Right? So I think like you're saying with job title, I think there's also going to be who are these things coming from?
Right.
And in response to Henry, I'm totally down with the idea of gamifying things. I think, that's kind of Matt's whole vibe is, these cool simulations make them more fun and engaged. I think we know that for autistic folks, ADHDers, et cetera, gamifying things is wonderful. And I wonder if instead of making it like a thing that you get good at, is framing these things more as a performance.
Mhm.
Because that's what masking is, right? It's performing neurotypicality. And so even in doing something like work chat, being like, what do you think neurotypicals would like you to say? Like, what do you think people want to hear? Is what you're guessing is not necessarily the right thing to say, because
Mhm.
it might not be right for you. But there is a right answer in this intervention, and that's what people are looking for. And I think even as somebody who is highly educated, like I call it my academic drag. And it's like I put on the blazer and I show up and I'm like, don't ask too many questions in the chat window. Don't, let your cats climb all over you. Clearly, I'm not being very today. But that's the thing, is it's a performance of this is what a professor is supposed to look like. Right. And so I think that perhaps that more so than here again is the right thing to do, but that like in order to do this successfully, this is what the expectations are and how can you perform them. And then also maybe a training at the end of it or something at the end that's like, and this is how we take off our mask at the end of the day, or this is how we make sure we stop camouflaging so we can take care of ourselves, allows for that, because there is research, right, that shows that masking or camouflaging is harmful to autistic people of all ages, right? Like we do know that, and it's in the background of your dissertation. And so, if we're teaching people this as a skill, just like we teach code switching, we teach all of these things, how can we also teach them of like, here's 5 things you could do at the end of the day to make sure that you get back to who you are, right? Like
Yeah.
tell somebody 3 facts about your special interest, or go sit in a room with your ear defenders on or your favorite music and listen to that for 10 minutes, right? And giving people maybe those skills as well as a way to kind of take off the facade.
Yeah.
Shannon, I love that you brought that up because I was just at the Gatlinburg Conference on Disabilities and talked to a really um uh, an aspiring PhD student who's autistic, and they really elevated that using code switching as an example for someone who's a racial minority, that their basically whole life um, they're parented or educated in within their family or within their community how to turn it off when they come home, and how to have that safe space at home where they can just be themselves. Whereas with autism, some folks are coming home and they're with their families and they can't turn it off. And so, or they're not, parented on how to turn it off or supported on how to turn it off. And so just kind of hearing that student's perspective, and you're saying the exact same thing, it really elevates the critical nature of that information.
Yeah, I love all of that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's an intervention in and of itself, is right? Like how to turn it off when you need to turn it off. Okay, so we went very long with our questions, which is fine. What we're gonna end up doing is, I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So why don't we go into a breakout room quickly? So Kari, I think as co-host, I can assign manually a breakout room. So I'm gonna do that.
Should be able to.
And then I will put the 4 of us in there.
And if you'd like to pause the recording, otherwise our conversation will show up in the transcript.
Yeah.
Oh. Let me see. Pause. Okay. Okay, I'm resuming.
Until everybody's back in here. Oh, Kari, can you turn your slides off?
Oh, yeah.
Matt, I think you didn't close the room. So Henry was still in the room. Oh, now he's back. Okay.
There he is.
Okay. So, Kari, the committee talked, and we do have a few points that you've already heard us discuss that we think will be important to take into consideration prior to submitting your dissertation. And then I'll share those with you.
Okay.
And then once you make those kind of edits and changes, I'll review them and then sign off on them.
Okay.
And then prior to publication, you'll already be sort of collaborating with us on, what other things may come up prior to publication.
Yeah.
And so with all of that said, I would like to congratulate you on passing your dissertation defense.
Yay!
And I am okay if you now go by Dr. Kari Sherwood.
Dr. Sherwood.
Congratulations.
I told my
Awesome.
kids when they get home from school, they have to address me as Dr. Kari Sherwood.
Dr. Mom.
Congratulations, Kari.
Yep.
This is
Thank
awesome.
you.
Very
Thank you so much,
exciting. Years
everyone.
and years of hard work have
Oh my God.
Years and years.
Yes.
years.
You deserve it,
So
Kari.
deserved. So
Thank
deserved.
you. Thank you all so much for being here. It means so much to me.
And congratulations on your job again, too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, I think everybody knows, right? I think everybody knows that I
Yeah.
accepted the position at Penn State. Okay, one person didn't know.
And I
Sorry, Julie.
I know a few of the faculty in the department.
I
that-
know.
Oh, you know?
Yeah, Allison Fleming came from MSU.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm excited. They are such a great group of people. My campus visit was amazing, and I just fell in love with all of them right away. So I had a good feeling about that one.
Yeah.
Good.
So proud of you, Kari.
Yeah, absolutely proud.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
You're
Thank you for
welcome.
all your help and all your support. And
You did all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
and also for those of you who don't have a copy of my dissertation, I'll send you the little like acknowledgement part because you're all in there. So
Aw.
Mhm.
Yay.
Now
A lot of
time to
fun.
celebrate.
Nice
Yeah.
meeting you
time to
guys.
go on
celebrate.
vacation.
I assume we're not meeting tomorrow morning, Kari?
No, no. I am sleeping for a week and then going on vacation. And
Yeah.
Good.
no, we're
And
not
then,
going on vacation.
and then starting a
until-
job.
And then starting a job. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be a little busy. I gotta sell my house, buy a new house,
No biggie.
move, all that good stuff.
Yeah. For now, just
Just bask in it.
yeah.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of
Absolutely.
hard work.
Yep.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Dr.
Congratulations again.
Sherwood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to thank everybody for joining us here today who could join you on this celebratory meeting or during this celebratory meeting. So
Yeah, I
thanks,
didn't think it
everybody.
would ever come.
I knew it was
We
coming.
had no doubt. Absolutely no doubt.
No doubt.
You did great.
Okay. And then
Okay.
Kari, I'll facilitate the sign sheet and then
Okay,
take care of that.
okay, awesome.
Okay.
Nice.
All
Yay.
right.
Ron and Vicky, take care.
Nice
to
to
see
meet
you.
you, Mom and Dad Sherwood.
Congrats again.
Nice to meet everyone.
Yep.
You too. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.